Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you are doing great. Notice that Humphrey is barely here, and now he is here. So now all is good. So today we're gonna be doing another episode of INFJ Confessions, and I will be telling you about the different types that I have been. Now, of course, this is a certain way of putting the question. It's somewhat jesting, like my type, as far as I can tell, is INFJ. This channel and my books are articulated around this idea as well. But this is the mainstream view online of my personality type. You can also refer to Personality Database if you want to have a look at that. Nevertheless, I have toyed with different type identities over time. And the reason why I identify as INFJ now is that ever since I started identifying as INFJ, I never felt the need to move on, despite some flirtations with other types. And I want to tell you a little bit about that because it could be interesting to compare with your own experiences. Are you someone who's always identified as INFJ and there's never been a change, or are you someone who has also experimented with different type identities? And I'd be curious to know what that experience was, if there were any interesting insights and takeaways. Before I move on, just remember that I have written a book on the INFJ type, the Ecstatic Soul. So if you haven't got this authoritative book on the INFJ consciousness, it's quite in depth. Check the links below if you want to get this book. There's also The Infinite Castle, which is a novel I wrote a year later, 2022. Rumor has it the main character is an INFJ. Check it out. It really supports my channel. And you know what supports my channel as well? Very much so. It's supporting me on Patreon. And you get some exclusive content from time to time. So the link is below. Thank you so much. My different type identities. So first of all, I will say this. Since 2017, it's been roughly 7 years now, I have been conversant in JCF language, the language of the Jungian cognitive functions. And I would say that, so it's been only 7 years. In the grand scheme of things, it's not been that long, but I started making videos about 6 or 7 months after I first started seriously engaging with the question of type. So I was maybe quick enough to start making videos. So you could argue in a sense that my history of knowing my type or identifying with a type is quite parallel to my YouTube history. There's not a lot of discrepancy there. In terms of the different types that I have been, they've all been N types. This is something that I should say from the start. They've always been N types. They have not always been introverted types, and they have not always been J types either. Okay, which if you refer back to the INFJ as a type, it's actually not so surprising, given that for reasons that we know, INFJs tend to be in between a lot of things. They're not in between N and S, that is for sure. Inferior SE guarantees that she will not be in between, but they can often be in between I and E, and between P and J. In fact, they can also be between F and T. Because that's another thing, is that the many types that I have, or the several types that I have been, or that I have embraced, experimented with, there's been some T types as well. So maybe I would just go in chronological order. Maybe I should start with the first type that I've ever been, which is the first result that I got when I took the 16 personalities test. And the result that I got then was INFP. I identified as that for about a week before it turned out to be somewhat unsatisfactory. And my friends who were also interested in the question of type, they were the ones who got me into this in the first place. I was living around Geneva at the time. My friend said, not INFP. Do it again. I did the test again, and I started doing a bit of research. Now, the second time I took the test, came out INTP. Okay, INTP. Now, I would say that I identified as INTP for quite a bit longer than INFP. I would say, say I identified as INFP for a week. I probably identified as an INTP for maybe 2 or 3 months. And maybe more, but let's say 2 or 3 months. Again, like the span of time between the first moment that I took a test and when I released my first video, which was essentially talking about identifying as an INFJ type, it's not that much. It's like 7 or 8 months. So all this stuff happened in a pretty compact fashion. So I would say that, INTP maybe 2 or 3 months. And I was actually pretty happy at some point with just saying, okay, I'm an INTP. That's what I am. I hadn't really had like an online sort of mode of interaction by then. I was just talking to people in IRL and and reading articles and reading about supposedly famous INTPs. And I did notice that didn't completely relate to the famous INTPs, at least not all of them, but I read some descriptions to a friend, and he said, I don't know, like that doesn't really sound like you, particularly in terms of the descriptions were kind of expressions of inferior effie, and it just didn't seem to match. It didn't seem to jive to him. So I re-explored, and eventually, sure enough, and they always involve taking the test again, even though you can take different tests as well, so you don't end up biasing the results even more than they are intrinsically. So I got INTJ. I got INTJ and I identified as INTJ for a good 2 or 3 months. And it just seemed to provide a lot of answers, particularly because I found that NI made a lot of sense, and I said, okay, this is my dominant function. That just is my function. So that's what I am. And I started looking at everything through the lens of being INTJ, and it made a lot of sense. But then I was kind of like, but I relate a lot more to TI than to TE. I don't have any TE. What's going on here, And I read about some INTJs, and I felt that I didn't relate to them as much as I just thought there was a slight mismatch. It felt more accurate than INFP or INTP probably, but it still wasn't quite that, So, I thought to myself, okay, like I've tried the various IN types. What about INFJ? And you know what? I thought the reason why I never really considered INFJ in the first place was that it's a kind of silly reason, but it just reveals how basically and essentially human our motivations are in our everyday, like prior to actually engaging technically with the question of type, is that like my ex-girlfriend at the time, she'd always identified as INFJ, and I just thought to myself, I cannot possibly be this. I just thought we were too different, that I was more this, more that, I was maybe more right-brained and or was it left-brained? Sort of like Cartesian and rational and extroverted, at least more than her, and a bit harsher in my moral judgments and all that stuff. So then when I started embracing the INFJ personality, because I had no choice, I had to try it out, and I realized, okay, this is actually I thought to myself, this is actually really solving a lot of my problems there. First of all, I read about descriptions of INFJs and I relate to it a lot more, particularly INFJ writers. It's through the medium of INFJ writers that I first identified strongly with the type. So that's that. NI dominance, which is what I wanted. TI, I realized could be quite developed even as tertiary, which is why I wanted. Reasonably well developed FE as well, which is exactly what's allowed. So I thought, okay, maybe NITI, FE, like a slight heterodox ordering of the stack, and I can be that. And I embraced it, and it just has been working ever since. There's been, since then, some interactions online where some people have argued that I was other types. And interestingly, the types that have been suggested have been ENFP, which I don't think I ever took that seriously. I think that just like some INFJs, I think that sometimes when I'm in a humorous mode, I may behave in a way that strikes some people as fitting an ENFP description. I don't think it's in the ENFP description because ultimately the humor is still quite colored by FE, but I can understand how people could see it that way from a distance. And another type that some people have occasionally said, well, actually, I should not say that they've occasionally said it. They hardly ever said it, but they've been saying it a little bit more since my typing by cognitive typology, because it's typing based on visual cues and body language. Something that, technique that they call voltology, and they typed me FE and I. So according to their particular framework, my FE is dominant, my NI is auxiliary. So I'm still within the same family, but I'm on the extroverted side. So I'll be, if you like, an ENFJ. It seems as if I would be a JCF ENFJ. As a matter of fact, I am not necessarily a JCF ENFJ because cognitive typology has what's called developments, where you could have a more or less introverted development, and my development is quite introverted. The area of overlap between the very specific type that I am in cognitive type, I think, can really plausibly be argued overlaps with INFJ anyway. But this has led some people who are familiar and cognizant with cognitive typology, its nomenclature, and with JCF, to translate it rather unmediatedly from FENI to ENFJ. So there's a small subsection of my audience that sees me as an ENFJ rather than an INFJ, I think. And when I say small subsection, I'm probably talking about 2 or 3% or something like that. But it maybe will increase over time. I don't know. It will also depend on the success of cognitive type and the expansion of its popularity. I still very much identify as an INFJ, but what is true is that I think that my second closest type is ENFJ. This is something that I really believe now. So that was for my history. Hopefully it's been of interest. What's been yours? Tell me everything. Don't tell me that you've never had any doubts, because that would not be very INFJ of you, and I would be suspicious. All right, let me know in the comments, and let's talk tomorrow. See you guys. Take care.